Hey guys, what do we really know about what went on in the 1122 King Road house when it comes to Dylan and Bethany? And what do we really know about the drug trafficking ring there in Moscow? Let's get into this video. Chaos Sector really lays out what went on that night and the whole drug trafficking ring that was surrounding the house.
Meter along with our reports. In an investigation which we report on, once it reaches a point where a consensus has been confirmed, we no longer have the need to report on that investigation. Because the truth, or at least evidence collected coming to that possible truth, raises the chaos meter. Some may be confused, but this is the chaos sector. What did you expect? And for those who somehow couldn't follow along, well, I'm not sure what to tell you, because it was quite easy to figure out. Nevertheless, there is something that we can discuss that's worth returning back to our reporting format. The prosecution has requested that the trial be pushed back to the summer of 2024. Here we go again. We all know trials may take years to reach a verdict, but the ball is in their court. Meaning they have the suspect, they have the evidence, and the families are awaiting a verdict. Although the defense has filed several motions, most of them, if not all, have been denied. So the defense has not provided a tough, defense against the prosecution based on the judge's perspectives. So why the long delays here? The rhetorical question, of course. You would think the defense would be the one pushing for more time. Irony is always a link to mystery. And if you followed, you know the saying here. Mystery leads to secrecy, and secrecy leads to conspiracy. See, the prosecution has requested this change because they know the evidence that they have has been compromised. And it's not only due to that specific DNA itself. It's the fact that 3 additional DNA samples were discovered in that home, which were males. No matter how much this is swept under the rug by the mainstream media, and even attempted by the prosecution, it will always be just as important as the alleged Kohberger's DNA. Look at it this way. Let's rewind back to the beginning, before Kohberger was identified. There would be 4 male DNA samples collected at the home, which included Kohberger's. His DNA is discovered on a knife sheath in Maddie's bed. Okay, he appears to be the murderer, but not so fast. There are 3 additional male DNA samples present as well. Track these males, identify them, bring them in for questioning. Lo and behold, those additional males could have been involved in the crime. Instead of 1 man facing the death penalty, you have 4 men charged, either it be one of the murderers or accessories to the murders. But apparently Bill Thompson thinks those DNA samples are irrelevant. I have never in my life anyway. With multiple DNA samples discovered and collected, and only 1 is investigated for the crime, any genuine jury member would scratch their heads. Who are the other 3 males at the home? One would ask another juror. The jury will determine Kohberger's fate, and if there are a few genuine jurors who raise that question, you may end up with a hung jury. A hung jury turns into a mistrial, and now the prosecution is in a very compromising predicament. But they started out in that predicament. I guess it's just becoming more unbearable for them.
Precisely. They are stuck in a corner, and surely so paranoid about how the defense will attack. The prosecution's request to extend everything into the summer of next year proves that they are not confident the current evidence against Kohberger will stand. And that's really...
Do you hear that, guys? They are not confident that the evidence that they have against Brian Kohberger will not stand. That's why they keep pushing out these freaking court dates on him, is because they know that the evidence that they have won't stand.
Devastating, considering it's allegedly his DNA found in the home. Yet they are the ones so jumpy in the court, not the defense. They may be trying to fix some loose ends, to no avail though. We all know the University of Idaho is involved, but Washington State University has their hands in this also. WSU Kim's daughter was informed about the murders later that Sunday morning, and WSU Kim calls the FBI that same day. What did she tell them? Because if we go based on her interviews, she had to snitch on individuals who were involved. Yet none of these individuals have been arrested. She claimed that Kohberger was the mastermind and had dirt on those housemates, but also stated that the fraternities and even sororities were somehow involved. So there is a misdirection of who the direct culprit or culprits were in those murders. We went over this, but let's do it again. For her to claim Kohberger was the mastermind behind the murders, yet others were physically present at the home that night, she is painting a scenario where Kohberger is accompanied by other perpetrators. So if this were the case, why was there only one person arrested? That was projection, using Kohberger as the scapegoat for the real perpetrators, who were the masterminds and had dirt on those housemates. Remember, she called the FBI that same day. If she calls the FBI that same day in connection to the murders, then she would have vital information linked to those murders. The same FBI was tracking Kohberger weeks prior before his arrest. Yet nobody else was being tracked, although there were multiple individuals at the home that night. So what we have here is Kohberger being framed. WSU Kim gives his name and identity to the FBI. They track him for weeks and eventually arrest him for the murders. Then after he is arrested, WSU Kim comes out and blabbers on interviews about the case. Frame Kohberger, and then pretend to be, quote, helping solve the case. WSU Kim, WSU Campus Police, the private driver, the DoorDash driver, Jack Showalter, Adam, Jack the ex-boyfriend, Dylan, even Bethany. 3 males at the home based on DNA. The fraternities, the sororities, and other individuals unidentified are all subject to criminal involvement in the case. You know.
Now, what they'll talk about here in a little bit, what if this frantic phone calls to Jack wasn't Jack D? What if it was Jack S? Jack Showalter? Think about that. They'll get into that here in a minute. It might not have been Jack D that Maddie and Kaylee was frantically calling. It might have been Jack S. Because Maddie's boyfriend could have possibly asked Jack S to watch over them that night, because Maddie and Jack S' boyfriend was like really, really close. They were good friends.
No, Moscow PD, the FBI, and so-called private investigators covered it up. But individuals deemed normal citizens are the ones that generated the frame against Kohberger, and the authorities obliged to protect the drug trafficking. A lot of that money gets laundered through many so-called legal businesses, and even universities. This money is generated throughout the town through things such as consumer spending, which generates revenue for the town's businesses. Of course, the university generates revenue, but its funding, perhaps a small percentage, comes from drug trafficking. Why would this be, you ask? It's simple. The dean is paid under the table to allow covert drug trafficking on campus and throughout the vicinity of the campus. Moscow PD, of course, is complicit with this as well. But the university specifically receives this dirty money, which can be distributed back out as, quote, school funding. You know, things like housing for the students, or renovating dorms and facilities on campus. Even for the fraternities and sororities, they also receive this dirty money. And since they are the pawns who buy and sell the drugs being trafficked, everyone comes out with a profit. And don't think this is some minor pocket change. We're talking about a university and one of the main sources of revenue for Moscow. I would estimate the trafficking negotiations range from hundreds of thousands to perhaps $1 million. On average, drug cartels generate about 5 to 10 billion annually. But to ensure their organization is kept secure, they need to funnel funds through legal sources, such as restaurants, community centers and programs, real estate, convenience stores, and other local businesses that allow them to clean their money up. And this is where the University of Idaho comes into play, including Washington State as well. Remember, the university has to protect their reputation and also the corrupt elements in Moscow PD. Thousands of college students partying, looking to get high. It's the epicenter for such trafficking. Like building a shopping mall near a college neighborhood. That shopping mall is going to break the bank. The trade-off? You allow us to traffic our drugs at your school, and we give you a nice financial package annually or even monthly. The accounting department simply allocates all of the dirty money, transforming it into a, quote, good deed. The university obliges, but has the greater demand in the negotiations. They shake hands, and of course the nightmare begins. I would estimate 90% of college students are struggling financially, and jobs are allocated to paying bills, which leave them with virtually nothing. So, to add additional income, they get involved in the drug trafficking business. Not all, of course, but when you are smothered with this criminal activity, and you see how much a classmate has in their bank account, it eats away at your morality. Money laundering happens everywhere, in every form. And the higher you get in the drug trafficking, the more money is spent to set up operations. On the lower end, you have the students, who carry out their roles, of course. And we have always stuck to this aspect of the case because this is the most logical reason for the murders. Even with the suspect in custody, they have not established a motive based on any evidence. Not what the mainstream media reported as a fact, or even some private investigator. They have no credibility after claiming Koberger had previously broken into his friend's apartment. Dateline NBC reported that as a fact. We've done 85% of the work. The other 15% is centered around, well, fragments of speculation from anonymous sources and so-called inside sources close to that college town. We feel no need to venture off into that realm. We focus on the case, what is being reported in the case, and what we draw from the information and evidence of the case. Dateline NBC claimed that Koberger's friend had her home broken into. As a friend, of course, she consults Koberger about the issue. He advises her to install a security system. At some point after that system was installed, Dateline claims Koberger broke into her home and used a Wi-Fi password to override the security system. They identified Koberger as the home invader, yet it wasn't the friend who had called the authorities. So how did they identify Koberger if nobody called the authorities about the break-in? Now Dateline slithers away from any accountability with that story and suggests that information was given to them by a, quote, source. There wasn't a source. Dateline literally made it up, because if there was a source, then Koberger was...
See right there? Dateline NBC made that shit up, guys.
...identified as the home invader, and yet was never arrested for it. Trust me, he would have been arrested, even a possible felony charge. And ironically, he perhaps wouldn't be sitting in court for these crimes, which also, ironically, wouldn't have produced that freaking episode on Dateline NBC about the home invasion. The point here, Dateline NBC literally made up a story, while Koberger was already arrested for the current crimes, attempting to justify the current charges by fabricating a previous one to the public. Then there's the claim of digital evidence, where Koberger had attempted to contact one of the girls. No evidence has been presented thus far, and we can't assume this is the prosecution's fatal blow against Koberger, because the families don't have time for courtroom antics. That's insulting the families who want justice. You have his DNA at the home, you have the digital evidence. Good riddance. But of course we know they don't have it. They have 1 in 5 octillion percentage worth of evidence against Koberger. Good luck with that. But the authorities, nor the prosecution, have not revealed any motive that Koberger had based on empirical evidence. Without this motive, based on some physical evidence linked to those murders, how do you connect Koberger to those housemates? You can't. And without a motive linked to those housemates, a jury would question if he is the killer, which magnifies why and how his DNA was discovered on a knife sheath in the bedroom. Here's something to ponder as well. You all remember the female that went on a date with Koberger, right? She claimed he basically sexually harassed her, right? Well, she's still alive. Surely the demented Koberger would have also murdered her. After all, she rejected him soon after, denying any possible dates in the future. No offense to her, but Koberger would take her rejection far more seriously than the more attractive college girls. When you have a witch hunt, a woman such as this will come out publicly and slander Koberger's name. But we don't know how those dates actually went. Heck, maybe Koberger called it off with her. Maybe she stalked him, maybe she tried to move in with him, maybe she came on too strong and Koberger wanted to just date a bit. There's no way to know if she's telling the truth. But what we can conclude from this, in connection to the crimes Koberger is being accused of now, this young woman would have been harmed in some way, even potentially murdered.
That is a very valid point. If Koberger was a murderer, wouldn't he murder this person for rejecting him? Or is everything this woman is saying a fabrication, just to smear Koberger's name?
The point here is that the image of Koberger being some sort of twisted individual, rooted in insecurities with women, would have resulted in prior murders, with this woman being the first victim. But she is still alive. No restraining order was filed against Koberger. She just went on a few dates with him. Nothing more, nothing less. Once again, to the audience, we have already went over these oddities. It's a broken record at this point, but I guess it's a great tune at least. I want to mention something that isn't a broken record, but it is also not new information. Kaylee's friend claimed she texted her around 10 a.m. to see if she was okay. But why would she assume something was wrong? Well, because she had been notified that Kaylee was harmed, right? Pretty sure someone had called Kaylee's siblings about her death. If those college students had been notified as early as 8 a.m., and everyone was spreading the bad news on social media such as Snapchat, surely Kaylee's younger relatives had been informed, and the other victims' family members also. Stop. Let that sit for a while. Once again, let's think about this very carefully. The friend named Katie stated she texted Kaylee around 10 a.m. to see if she was okay. Without WSU Kim's accounts of claiming college students had been notified about the murders, why would Katie text Kaylee to see if she was okay at 10 a.m.? You see what I just did there? Deductive reasoning, that's what. I present it this way, because Katie's so-called concern contradicts the actual setting at the home. The timelines don't match. If she called around 10 a.m., then this means others had been informed also, perhaps even earlier. We know this based on an actual student's accounts in his interview.
She said it right there, guys. The timeline don't match.
But from the media's narrative, Katie calling around 10 a.m. proves that she was aware of Kaylee being, well, harmed. Yet how would she know this unless the housemates had notified others around that time? Of course, none of that is in Dylan's affidavit. No mention of Dylan or Bethany aware of an emergency around 10 a.m. in which they had notified friends. Remember, the call went out around 12 p.m. Those friends knew about the murders earlier than the reported discovery around 12 p.m., which puts them in the hot seat, and also a possible criminal charge, right along with the surviving housemates. Obstruction of justice. Yes, everyone who was informed about those murders are all subject to an obstruction of justice charge. Sure, we can say they were scared, but I don't think it was a fear in general. Rather, a fear of calling the cops about the murders. And this aligns more with withholding information, which is obstruction of justice. Damage control. Now, since we know that college students knew that the housemates were murdered, then we also know that Katie knew Katie had been murdered. So why would she go on national television and not tell the truth? For obvious reasons, of course. That would change the entire scope of the case. Let's pick apart a lot of this confusion. The mainstream media, which interviewed Katie and others, intentionally avoided the conflicting scenario of Katie texting Kaylee early that morning, when there would be no indication of any danger, if not for a housemate notifying others about that danger. I viewed that episode on 2020, and it cunningly starts with Katie at the point of the 10 a.m. phone call to Kaylee, not the initial communication relayed to her. I wanted to find out when she was notified so I could piece the timeline together. So they want you to assume Katie was notified close to 10 a.m. Okay, sure, fine. They're aware of real true crime investigators, I tell you. On the other end of the media spectrum, you have social media and content creators who interviewed students anonymously, who explain how someone such as Katie would have a reason to call Kaylee. And that would be, of course, the murders. And this was approximately around 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. when Snapchat started to get flooded with the bad news. So based on that timeline, it doesn't matter when Katie was notified, it's more so what she was notified about. And that would be...
Let's take a quick intermission, guys. I gotta get my daughter a cookie.
Inside of me, you better watch out if you ignite me's a road ahead of full prophecy to be the greatest beast the world has ever seen. I feed him every day like the bones clean. I feed him all the hate and he grows me, and he gets claws real big, pissed off quick. And if you cross him, you might drop dead. Metaphorically, of course, settling the score, never getting bored, loves the blood and gore, always wanting more freedom from the source. They don't really understand until they feel the force departed. If you start shit, you'll be heartless in the darkness, torn apart quick. You left scars ripped, you'll be chewed up and discarded. And this world ain't right, won't accept it. Negative energy, I expect it. Once it's in your mind, it's infectious. So fight for your life and reject it. You better give me space, I'm protective. My adrenaline spikes when I'm threatened. And if you stay in my way, I'm aggressive. Cause when there's no exit, I'll kill when I'm desperate. lightning, thunder, pouring weather. Yo, I'm a go-getter, try to do it like me, but I do it better. I got a mind that's clever, the beast inside is competitive as ever. I'm conscious, my subconscious, an accomplice to me. I promise the darkness, I can honest believe. But don't cross me, I might lose control of the lost beast. He's locked away inside with the key controlled by fight or flight. And this world ain't right, won't accept it. Negative energy, I expect it. Once it's in your mind, it's infectious. So fight for your life and reject it. You better give me space, I'm protective. My adrenaline spikes when I'm threatened. And if
Okay, now what does everyone think so far? The timeline is wrong. There is mass obstruction of justice charges, possibly. And next they're going to get into the drug ties to the house and drug ties to Dylan.
Kaylee was discovered deceased at the home. That's a note to tack on the investigative wall. Keep that in mind because it will resurface. Ethan's friend Hunter is the one who allegedly discovered both Ethan and Xana deceased. And of course Kaylee and Maddie as well. But here's the problem. It's the lie about Dylan discovering her housemates so-called unconscious. Now many may use this to justify Katie's claim of thinking Kaylee was harmed, or was in an accident, or better yet still alive. Although that doesn't hold much water when you break it down. Get a load of this. We have 3 settings in the home. Let's pick them apart. Number 1, Dylan and Bethany are unaware of any danger nor violence and wake up later Sunday morning and find their housemates, quote, unconscious. Number 2, Dylan in particular heard screaming and yelling, thought it was her housemates having a party, and later discovered the housemates, quote, unconscious. Number 3, Dylan and Bethany are aware of the danger and the murders, text each other about it all, and called peers over to figure out what to do about the deceased housemates. In connection to Katie's accounts of calling Kaylee around 10 a.m., this would align with both number 1 and number 2. But I think you're smarter than that. Dylan didn't call anyone about an unconscious housemate, because the claim that Dylan and Bethany were awake during the attacks changes not only the setting in the home, but it changes the communication relayed out, and also the time that communication was relayed. WSU Kim claims that Dylan and Bethany were awake and knew who was in the home. Some claim she's just an opportunist. Okay, well, an actual student claimed that the news about the murders had spread around 8 to 9 a.m., and this wasn't about an unconscious housemate, it was about deceased students at the home. These students, of course, were never interviewed by the mainstream media, because for one, it creates a scenario where the students were notified about the murders approximately 3 to 5 hours prior to the 911 call, which was around 12 p.m. We obviously held the surviving housemates accountable for not calling 911, but others were notified as well, who could have called also. And another reason is, if this is established, then it raises the question of exactly when did those outside students find out about the murders? See, the mainstream media's agenda was to depict the college students as innocent or typical young people, and Koberger as the maniac who stalked those young people. But if Katie knew about the murders around 10 a.m., why wouldn't she call the cops? And to magnify that setting even more, it wasn't just Kaylee. Katie had been notified about, that's misdirection in her interview, because if someone had called Katie about Kaylee being murdered, well, Maddie was right beside her. And of course, Xana and Ethan. So Katie would know those housemates were murdered, and she still didn't call the cops. Never mind what others did or didn't do, Katie had been notified that 4 people had been discovered deceased. One of your friends were the victims, you know? Forget what everyone tells you. Don't live with the guilt of staying quiet. You're Kaylee's friend. That's a responsibility as a friend. Many people forget that. Nevertheless, Katie did not tell the truth in that interview. Well, sort of. I think Katie may have texted Kaylee out of disbelief that she was murdered. It happens. She didn't truly believe that her friend was gone, so she called her, hoping and wishing. And once again, this was not explained, but we can hear it and see it in her eyes. But the mainstream media will not allow her to explain it that way. And due to this, you end up with a mysterious question from many, of why did Katie call Kaylee to see if she was okay, if in that very setting, there was no source from the housemates, that there was a problem. One word, affidavit. that doesn't provide any evidence of actual physical danger or violence. So Katie's claims only indicate that the students were aware of the murders simultaneously in the mainstream media, alluding to this without any trail of communication from the housemates. So basically, Katie was concerned about Kaylee without anyone telling her something was wrong with Kaylee. Yeah, I know it sounds off, but that's how the mainstream media depicted it. You understand? I have empathy for...
Yeah, so the mainstream media guys slanted everything. They didn't want to hear the truth coming from these students. So what they do, they suppressed it, and they're slanting the story.
Katie, because I do see the hurt in her eyes. But unfortunately, I also see someone who fears telling the truth, and that just adds
So that
to
right
the
there.
mystery. We're sorry, but we have to accept the cold truth. The families were informed, and unfortunately what they may have feared had come true. They knew their children were involved with, or associated with, shady and dangerous groups of people. And the safest path to take for them is to stay silent and allow an innocent man to go down. Has anyone ever wondered why Kaylee's family is the only family publicly speaking out? I have a hunch to why. I think the reason for this is the other families were not directly involved with their children based on location. And I believe Kaylee's family is the only family who resided in Moscow. The other families were in other towns throughout Idaho. This isn't the only reason, but if they resided in Moscow, then they most definitely had direct knowledge of what happened and who was responsible. Mind you, the students were aware of those murders early as 8 a.m., but we know it was earlier than that, based on common sense. That news spread soon after it had occurred, and this would be around 3 a.m., so approximately 3 to 4 a.m. is when the bad news was known. And throughout the early morning hours of Sunday, people were awakened to the bad news. By 8 a.m., Snapchat messages were flooding everyone because, well, most people are awake by then. By 10 a.m., everyone in Moscow is aware of those murders, including Katie. We know Moscow PD was aware. They have already been exposed. It's just so unfortunate for Katie that she made that statement on national television, because it opened up a can of maggots. She knew Kaylee was murdered, along with other friends of Kaylee, and we have to conclude that Kaylee's family had been informed prior to the housemates being discovered deceased by Moscow PD. But we do not leave stones unturned here, and unfortunately they themselves had to execute damage control for themselves and other parents of the victims. Examining this photo, I see a problem. I see a deer caught in the headlights. That would be Kaylee, while Dylan, to the right, appears comfortable, relaxed, even assured. Although Dylan was the younger housemate, I believe she was more in interaction with the drug trafficking environment. Kaylee, on the other hand, may have been introduced to that. No offense to her, we would never slander any of those victims. But if it's a part of the investigation, we have to acknowledge it. Hypothetically, this photo could be a trip down to one of the suppliers in town. Dylan is comfortable with the ride, while Kaylee appears a bit nervous, kinda unsure of what she's getting herself involved with. She may even be high on marijuana, something she also may have not done before Dylan moved in. Let's be honest here, Dylan brought in a drug influence. She always appears high in her photos, so she clearly was an element of drug use in the house. Others may have puffed here and there, but perhaps it didn't become more frequent until Dylan became a housemate. Don't forget, Dot's claim has Dylan outside the house on the porch smoking marijuana with Bonnie and Clyde Sunday morning. Needed to point that out. Nobody is perfect, and college students will dabble here and there, but you have to be...
Let's not get into the whole Dot thing. Dot's been pretty much well debunked.
Careful of who you interact with, because once you associate with certain people, it's difficult to detach from them. And I think Kaylee was attempting to do that by leaving town. She saw the danger and decided to get the hell out of Dodge. Someone or a group was aware of her plans, someone close to her who knew everything. She may have moved out, but was pulled back. And guess by who? The very person sitting next to her in this photo. I'll leave it at that. If you all recall, Olivia vouched for the ex-boyfriend, claiming he was 100% innocent. That was a red flag for me early on, because for one, your words have no merit in regards to an investigation. No offense. Second, the only reason you publicly made that defense is because he was the first suspected, that's right, suspected individual due to the circumstances. A motive existed, and he had immediate contact and access to that home. Ex-girlfriend is leaving town. He's heartbroken, murders her before she leaves forever. So of course Olivia quickly attempted to put that fire out, which only added more suspicion. Personally, I believe it was Jack Showalter who was called. And the reason they don't want it to be this Jack is because this obviously has a trail back to when Showalter warned the girls earlier that night. And of course, putting two and two together, we at least would know the murders are linked directly to that warning, which we already know. But the mainstream media cunningly clips out that portion of audio. Once again, this puts a focus on a direct motive, as Jack tells the girls, they're going to get you for this. If the mainstream media played that, then they would also have to report on it. And this would lead to reporting on what Moscow PD had discovered as well. They would have to ask Showalter about the warning he gave, because it could lead to a suspect, or suspects. Yet it just faded away. If we go with the claim that it was the ex-boyfriend who was called, well, they're still not out of the woods, because those calls were obviously an emergency, trying to reach the ex-boyfriend during a time of danger. And if I'm not mistaken, both Jacks stayed right across the street.
Yeah.
Pick a Jack then, it doesn't matter which one it was based on the urgency. But from a motive perspective, if it was the ex-boyfriend, we can suggest he allowed it all. Showalter, on the other hand, at least did warn the girls, and furthermore, he was somewhat of a big brother that night. We didn't see the ex-boyfriend with the girls being a protector, right? But once again, notice how the mainstream media depicted him as suspicious. The way they presented their reports in such suspenseful fashion, he did in fact look suspicious. That's until we saw Jack with the girls leaving the bar and arriving at the grub truck. And examining that grub truck surveillance, he appears to simply be looking over the girls like a big bro. There is a moment where it appears Maddie and Jack exchange words, which the mainstream media tried to depict as an argument. Yet, Jack had a smile on his face, the chunky guy also found it amusing, and Maddie just seemed a bit salty about a comment Jack made. In fact, Jack even gestured to say, "Maddie's drunk, never mind her." Kaylee paid it no mind. They were all just, teasing. Now I will mention some of the allegations against Showalter, which can be a problem. He has been accused of sexual harassment and was kicked out of his fraternity. And a photo surfaced of him hunting wild game with a machete. Now that is cause for alarm. And many assumed that hunting prowess was used on the housemates. But why would he previously warn the girls about a danger? Could that be reverse psychology? Or a sick game he played? It's possible. But my gut tells me he knew about the danger they were in and tried to watch over them while they were out on the town. And the reason Maddie and Showalter appeared to be having a dispute is because apparently Showalter is best friends with Maddie's boyfriend. Hey dude, can you watch over Maddie Saturday night? I know she's gonna get really drunk and there's a lot going on out there, so look after her for me. No problem, bro, I got you. And that's what he did. The ex-boyfriend, on the other hand, his alibi was not confirmed. And if that alibi was not confirmed, and he was the Jack that was called, well, he's a suspect, or at least knew what happened. I wonder what's on Kaylee and Maddie's phone during those phone calls. Oh, the family claimed it was, quote, power calling, or something like that. Well, can we obtain those power calls then? Just to be sure? Freedom of Information Act might be the way to go. Now, there is an element of overstepping boundaries, but if you dedicate yourself to getting justice for others, I think you have the right to take that stance and fight for that information. Because what if it is revealed that those phone calls were in fact an emergency? The rest is self-explanatory.
That is a very valid point right there. That really is, guys.
And the more damaging issue is Kaylee's family in particular. Could also be charged with, you guessed it, obstruction of justice. Oh my, this is looking very dreadful for those families. It hurts even more for the victims because their families are staying silent. We exposed this in another high-profile case regarding Kanika Jenkins. Her family knew who was responsible for her death and kept quiet about it, and we no longer felt the need to report.
And that's why the chaos meter had reached its limit. If anyone has paid attention, everything was centered around the college students and what they knew. Katie made a huge mistake in that interview, and it gave us the concrete evidence to support our overall theory. We had come to the conclusion already, but that basically solidified our conclusion. Despite her sadness in losing her friend, she is actually held accountable as well. Many may not like that, but it's the cold-hearted truth. She knew Kaylee had been murdered and didn't call the authorities. She was told to not say anything, and she did what she was told. I understand completely But when it comes to the law, there is a crime she committed. If she is notified that her friend was murdered, and obviously nobody had called the authorities up until that point, Katie deciding not to call is keeping this information from the authorities. Katie claimed to call Kaylee around 10 a.m. to see if she was okay. Now this is not how that unfolded, because Katie knew Kaylee was murdered. Or, let's give her the benefit of the doubt here. Let's say she assumed that Kaylee may have been harmed or attacked. She still decided to keep this information from the authorities. No matter what scenario, Katie obstructed justice. And then we have to also consider when she actually was notified about the murders. Maybe she found out around 8 a.m. when everyone had started spreading the wildfire.
Bethany, Dylan, Katie, they all are guilty of obstruction of justice. They knew the murders happened. They didn't call the cops. Basically, those college students suppressed everything until they could get their fucking story straight and then call the cops. This case reeks. It absolutely reeks of corruption. And is there an innocent man sitting in that defendant's chair? More likely, probably, if all these students didn't call 911, they waited and waited and waited and waited while those poor, slain students laid in a pool of their own blood for 8 hours while everyone else was trying to figure their stories out. I don't believe Dylan. I don't believe Bethany, and I don't believe Katie.
Of course, she wasn't the only one. You know that. Dylan and Bethany are the first to blame. And that brings us back to the setting.
Right there, Dylan and Bethany is the first ones to blame.
Were not depicted as being aware of any danger throughout that night. And when they discovered their peers, once again, they were depicted as not recognizing their peers were murdered. This is the first element of the cover-up. We broke that all down for those who criticized our recent episodes. Unfortunately, you're not up to speed. Now you are. Blood splattered all over Maddie's bedroom. Blood splattered all over Xana's bedroom. And Dylan and Bethany are depicted as believing they were unconscious? Well, somehow this was the narrative. But of course, it didn't add up to social media. Now, executing damage control, there was the claim that Dylan and Bethany were texting each other during that night about the murders. Yeah, nice try, but it won't work. Yet, that recent depiction of those housemates benefits the defense greatly. Because if they were texting each other during the attacks, for one, this destroys Dylan's accounts in her affidavit. Literally everything she claimed to have happened is thrown out, and this prevents her from testifying based on her accounts in the affidavit, which would be a lie. And the wacky part is it would be thrown away by the prosecution. They would contradict their own potential witnesses' accounts. Wow. Bethany, whose accounts did not provide any details worthy of any real attention, is transformed to physically being aware of the danger that night. And what does this all mean, you ask? It means that they didn't call the authorities during the attacks, yet were texting each other about their friends being murdered. Being afraid gets you only so far. Now it becomes a scenario where they were complicit with their friends being murdered. Now you have a scenario where the survivors are texting each other during and after the murders, which spanned from 3 to 4 a.m., and just sat in a home with 4 deceased housemates until 12 p.m.? Koberger who? If the media reports that Dylan and Bethany were texting each other during the attacks, aren't they supposed to be charged with obstruction of justice, or even accessories to those murders? Ann Taylor is foaming at the mouth because this information has been reported as fact. Mind you, the media wouldn't claim this unless Moscow PD had obtained that data from their phones. But you may ask, why would Moscow PD throw Dylan and Bethany under the bus like that? Well, it's not so much by choice. They have no choice, because their suspect is not the killer. If they wanted to throw Dylan and Bethany under the bus, Koberger wouldn't be sitting in that courtroom right now. Keep in mind, that claim of Dylan and Bethany being aware of the attacks and murders can't be, quote, redacted. It can't be taken back, sacrificing the integrity of the case in which you have your suspect to execute damage control to deflect away from the growing belief that the suspect is not the killer. Well, this is what happens when the frame is not successful. You have to start eating your own, as it becomes a case of survival. If I were Bethany, I would slide over to Kohberger's side, because the prosecution has already shown they will feed you to the wolves in attempts to protect themselves. And even Dylan, who we have an unfavorable opinion about, should consider just testifying and telling the truth. You're both just speckles on the ground, compared to the bigger picture. The prosecution will have no problem betraying you if they can't use you to their advantage. It already happened. But if you ride it out in hopes that the prosecution can complete that frame and it fails, the focus now is on who murdered those housemates. And since they were texting each other during the murders, the surviving housemates are seen as suspects. The point, do the right thing, because the risk doesn't have a reward, only consequences.
I want to say to some desperately requesting we return to this reporting format. Appreciate hard work. You may not like it, but to be honest, we don't do this for you to like it. Put it this way. You don't like how this person or that person is investigating. Doesn't that sound a bit selfish to you? And like mentioned prior, we are actually done investigating this case. Well, there are a few things that caught my attention, but we're not going to catch the big fish, you know. And you know that. So, it seems you are more entertained with the thought of some content creator reeling in that big fish. It's not going to happen, especially in this case. So, for those who are complaining and, quote, threatening to unsubscribe, I mean, what is that about? That's like an elephant with gnats crawling on its trunk. And I guess that's the perfect analogy, because you would be nothing more than parasites. Not condescending, just giving them a reality check. Chaos Sector has been around far too long. You can't slither around unnoticed. To everyone else who has supported our efforts, we truly appreciate each and every one of you.
What do we think about this, guys? Is Dylan and Bethany complicit in this? Could Bethany possibly slide over to the defense? And is the murders possibly a drug connection? This case is getting more and more jacked up every fucking day. And I'll keep covering it. And on the 26th at 3 p.m. my time, 1 p.m. Pacific, I'm going to do my best to live stream the Kohberger court case, because they're going to be setting up for his trial. And just like they said, Ann Taylor is foaming at the mouth. Is Dylan going to testify in the trial? Is she going to get ripped to shreds by Ann Taylor? The only way to find out is to watch the court case. The actual trial. And why do they keep pushing the trial back and back and back and back? When it gets closer to the trial this time, this coming summer, are they going to push it back even more? Because do they possibly know that they don't have the right person? Is that why their evidence is so flimsy? Because they don't have the right person? And where does Jack Showalter fit into all this? Could he be one of the perps? Because there is 3 unknown male DNAs that the prosecution will not freaking test. Alright guys, like, comment, subscribe to my channel, hit that bell notification for any new uploads, and if you're feeling frisky, hit the join button, and you'll get some member exclusive perks. And also, why don't you go check out my merchandise store. Well, we have some True Crime Cult swag in that store. We have the new Psycho Evil Clown sweat set. Alright, you guys have a good night. We're only getting warmed up here at True Crime Cult. Peace.
When you're not here, life is insufferable. Don't be a stranger, even though we said pause. Darling, I fear pause is impossible, 'cause I want your love around no matter the cost. places I lost what I need.